me see. Recording. Excellent. Great. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So a little bit about me. My name is Megan Black. I am getting my PhD in counselor education here at Warner. I'm, let's see, fourth year. So I call myself an LMHC, a licensed Medicaid counselor. I kind of joke that instead of a mental health counselor, I'm a behavioral counselor. I'm trained in infant and early childhood mental health. Has anyone heard of that field? I didn't know either when I was getting my master's. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a population I had no idea existed, but it really focuses on the relationship or the behaviors of the kiddo, mental health of the kiddo, the adults, and then the attachment in between. Sorry,
Yeah.
I keep looking down at this computer. I'm a brain-based therapist, so and I run a private practice called Sharing Calm Counseling Services. My kind of motto is learning how to practice calm curiosity in a chaotic world, because it's really hard to practice being calm, right? Especially post-pandemic, during the pandemic, in a classroom where there's been behaviors you don't really understand why. I'm also, so I started out actually working as a school counselor for kiddos age pre-K to high school while I was doing my 2 years working towards my licensure before I decided to come back and get my PhD. I'm currently doing my clinical internship at Mount Hope Family Center. All of my research has to do, is focused on the critical role of the caregiver. And I study interpersonal neurobiology. It's a framework that emphasizes the importance of connection and safety. Has anyone heard of Laurie DeSalles? No? So I read this, I bought this book because it's aligned with my framework and it's all focused on teachers. And I'm like, oh, that's great. I can use that for this presentation today. So her work is just this huge paradigm shift in education-based and relational neuroscience. So all about the relationships and connecting with the kiddos, right? And helping create a safe classroom, right? So I'm going to introduce you a little bit to her. Is there sound?
It is such an honor to be sitting beside all of you this morning. PowerPoint is going to be pulled up here hopefully in a moment. I want to think about behavior. If you could define behavior, what would that be? How would you define behavior? This is what I study. I want you to take a look at this body of water. We really don't see much here other than an aerial view of the beautiful blue surface. We don't know how it came to be. We don't know how it evolved. We're not sure of the environment that supports it. We see just an image that we don't understand and we don't really take in. This is what we're going to be talking about today. The title is Diving Beneath Behaviors, a journey through our nervous systems. A behavior is something that a person does that can be observed, it can be repeated, it can be assessed. But there's so much more. I work in the schools 2 days a week, and I want to share this definition that came to me after I left my 5th grade class. So I'm teaching graduate students at Butler. I'm traveling around the world integrating applied educational neuroscience. But the most important work I do is in the K through 12 or pre-K through 12 classroom. And I want to read this to you because this is really what we miss. We miss the mark here. A child's behavior isn't about me. They're not doing this to me. It's a symptom, like a sneeze showing us a cold, a cut with a wound, or a scab showing us healing. This behavior is showing us that the nervous system is rough. Can we become curious? Can we reach beneath that behavior? This is my lab. At Butler University, my lab is the classroom. I am a practitioner. I take the research and study human teacher and student behavior. And I begin with my own behavior. And I so wish I would have known this as a young mom, as a young teacher. What I'm going to talk about for the next 15 minutes is as much about me personally as it is professionally. And I hope you can come away from these next few minutes thinking about the power of your nervous system. This is Crystal Williams. I taught at Belzer Middle School in Indianapolis with her during the pandemic years, along with Lori Kirkland. I go in 2 mornings or 2 afternoons a week, and I take the research, and I'm going to share some of the practices with you this morning that we can integrate in our homes and in our schools and our organizations. And this is reaching beneath the behavior and getting out in front of the behavior. This is the classroom I entered in this January, and I left them last week. I got to be in there after lunch, in the afternoons, 2 days a week, and I'm going to tell you, it was one of the roughest classes I have ever experienced, but they learned about their nervous systems in complex ways. This is Miles, my very first grandson. And I share this image because I get a do-over as a grandmother. I get to watch his behavior, reach beneath the behavior, sit beside my daughter. And I get to observe and integrate ways that I was unaware of as a young mom when we think about the developing brain and body of our nervous systems. This is the applied educational neuroscience framework. Okay. It is.
So what you did was really introduce the applied neuroscience, educational neuroscience framework, right? I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to kind of take over where she left off, right? And talk a little bit about the language of the nervous system. How many people are familiar with their nervous system? Okay, great. Yeah, very familiar?
No, I said describe familiar.
Okay, mindful of what state your nervous system is at in any given moment, right? So Dr. Dan Siegel actually talks about this as like the 7th sense, as being aware of where your nervous system is at. But at the end of this, my presentation, I'd like you to be able to not only understand where your nervous system's at, but where the kiddos are at, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the language, right? When we understand that negative behaviors are only signals addressing the dysregulation of the nervous system, we begin to feel empowered and relieved. The way we feel, think, and behave is a nervous system response. As we teach our staff and students about the neural anatomy, we learn together. I just think that's really powerful because Lori describes students really as that body of water, right? Or like the picture you've seen of iceberg, right? There's so much underneath. And when you begin to understand the nervous system, you know that those behaviors are really just responses to where they're at in the nervous system. I am going to talk a little bit about co-regulation and touch points. And then I'm not going to really dig into the educator nervous system. I think Wiljar is going to talk a little bit about the educator themselves, not necessarily about the nervous system, but just as a kind of a broader scope of the educator themselves. So today we're going to talk about brain-based learning. So how many people have seen, so I saw a few hands about the nervous system. How many people have seen the hand-brain model? Oh, yay, well done. Okay, so touch the brain, right? Did you know that our prefrontal cortex is part that the wise brain, the part that is, right here that helps with regulation and self-regulation and the ability to make decisions and reasoning? This actually is develops up until we're almost 30, right? So many humans that you're working with in the classroom are still developing that. But this prefrontal cortex can pop up. And then you get to this, the amygdala, the fear center. This is where the fight or flight happens, right? This is where this actually will take over. If this is activated, this reasoning wise brain pops up. And even further down is the brainstem. This is the spinal cord. This is the part of your brain that creates the freeze or the shutdown, right? These are millions of years old, and all they want is safety and connection. So if there's a fear of safety and connection, this part of your brain is going to pop up, right? And you're going to have less access to those tools to be able to connect or feel safe. So if you know that within yourself, or if you know that a kiddo, their lid is popped, knowing how to get them back is about co-regulating, about using those touch points that we'll talk a little bit about. But humans are hardwired for safety and connection. So this is important. Brain-based learning is important for students. As Dr. Lori talks about, she talks about the brain with kiddos, right? I talk about it with my 3-year-old kiddo clients, right? We talk about the brain, we talk about the amygdala, we name it, we give it names, right? But when that's activated, it's hard to control the things that are going on in our body. So for students, when they feel safe and connected, their brains are more open for learning and growing. This aligns with how the brain is hardwired to seek out safety and connection, right? That's how they're going to learn. They can't actually really fully learn in this state. For educators, creating a safe, connected environment isn't just about the classroom, it's about classroom management, but it's about fostering a space where brains can thrive. So, who's heard of polyvagal theory? I know Char has because they talk about it a lot. It's actually, the polyvagal theory is fundamentally about the fact that humans are hardwired for safety and connection, right? Millions of years ago, we're going to survive. We're more likely to survive if we've got a tribe or we've got people, right? And we are close with those people. We're not going to get ousted, right? There's that safety and connection. It is hardwired in our nervous system. So this is the polyvagal chart. I like this student polyvagal chart a little bit different. You may have seen it as like a ladder, but at the top is the ventral vagal. It's the green zone, right? It's when students feel safe and connected. They're in an optimal state for learning, right? That's their lids are closed, right? They're available for new information. The yellow zone, mobilization. This is when our nervous system is slightly activated. That's when students are anxious, agitated. They may be in a fight or flight mode, right? So nervous, they're feeling angry, irritated. That is their lid is flipped. What do they need? How can they co-regulate with the adult human to get them back to safety and connection? And then the red zone is shut down. This is so overwhelmed, feeling hopeless. Students may disengage. This is actually what they talk about in polyvagal theory as the dorsal vagal, right? This is literally shame, loss, shutdown, right? In that state, it's really just about grounding and getting back to a more regulated state. So I told you I was going to talk to you a little bit about brain aligned strategies. How do you connect with these kiddos, right? This workshop is about relationship building, right? So brain aligned strategies talk about what state are their brain in. If it is words, this is the prefrontal cortex, right? Encouraging executive functions through problem solving tasks. So continuing that connection by using something like, I see you're being a really kind helper today. Can you help me with other students in the Connection strategy. So if they're in the limbic system, you know that their lid is flipped. So connection is engaging the emotional brain, right? So this really helps students feel seen, heard, and present. Like these touch points allow you to help co-regulate with the kiddos depending on where they are in their nervous system, right? Where they're at in their nervous system, right? And then finally, so sensory strategies. A lot of people say, oh, you know, that kiddo was so young, they don't remember. Kiddos still store things, right? We know that things are stored in our nervous system. We may not be able to associate words to it because our prefrontal cortex wasn't developed at that time, but there are things that are stored at our nervous system level that are sensory. So if they're at that completely collapsed, grounding activities to help reduce that fight or flight, that stress response. Some examples are temperature sensations, putting ice chips with kiddos or even adult clients that I work with. I put like lavender hand lotion in their hands and we do that sensation and smell it. But if they're at the brainstem, right, at complete shutdown, it's really important to realize that they're not able to learn in that moment. It is necessary to help them ground. There's a little workbook right at the bottom. So if you can open your workbook, we put a little section. So if you have any ideas on what could work in those spaces, it's a great way to brainstorm. So I want to pull it all together. How am I doing?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So where is the behavior on the polyvagal chart? So I'm gonna just describe some kiddos, and I'd love if you can raise your hand and tell me where you think they are on the chart. So if a kiddo, it feels rounded, right? They're really focused, they're learning. Where do you think they are?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about anxious? Yeah. What about angry? Anything?
Could be sympathetic or dorsal vagal.
So what do you think the difference is?
Maybe on
This is great because we can kind of explore what you think.
I think it depends on how a kid shuts down. Sometimes anger is sympathetic, but some kids shut down and become angry at the same time. So I agree with what Brandon's saying.
Yeah. So let's see if the kiddo presents by hitting or kicking or screaming. Where do you think that would be?
Dorsal vagal.
Dorsal?
Hitting, kicking, and screaming.
So that's sympathetic. So that kiddo is activated, right? That kiddo is activated. So they are not in the dorsal vagal. If the kiddo is like you described, right, sitting in the corner, they could be really activated, really angry. But if they're sitting and they've completely shut down, right, they have entered their spinal cord, right, the dorsal vagal. They have this is where disassociation happens, right? Because I am so overwhelmed, I need to disassociate, right? So that's how you tell the difference between the two. So using tools to help move you from, if you see that they're really angry and they're using, they have big behaviors and they're using loud words and hate this, they're still here, right? They haven't completely gone to shutdown, right? Shutdown is really like a collapse. And I can share these pictures if you want. But yeah, are there any questions about that? You want to try a few more?
Two more.
Okay. So what about frustrated? what do you think frustrated? She was like frustrated, like working on a test, can't figure it out. Yeah, so they're beginning to be activated, right? So like Brandon was talking about, like there is in between, right? That person is beginning to be activated. It may not be angry like the person we described, but it's still in that mobilization, right? I often use the word as activated, right? My stress response system is activated right now, or that kiddo's stress response system is activated. What do they need to help regulate? Or even, is their activation activating me? What do I need? Because if an adult is dysregulated, they can't help a dysregulated child, right? So that is actually, so frustrated is kind of this top part of the sympathetic. What about stuck or helpless?
How is it presented?
So, kiddo was kind of given up.
Okay.
Are they telling you that, or you sense that that's what they're feeling?
They're presenting like they're coming to class, they're not doing their work, they've given up.
Immobilized. What would you, when they're at immobilization and they're at dorsal vagal, what would you suggest?
So sensory strategies,
Thank you.
right? Helping them ground, understanding, being curious about what is going on, because it's likely that underneath the surface, there is something bigger going on, right? But grounding them, helping them get back into that present moment, right? Helping them co-regulate because they can't self-regulate in that moment, right? When we're in a dorsal vagal, it's really, really hard. Even full-grown adults that have the full brain that's fully developed have difficulty with this, right? So meeting that kiddo where they're at is going into that spinal cord part of the brain and getting to the sensories, right? What helps them. Lori, so I highly recommend watching the rest of that TED Talk. Lori kind of dives into how she talks about the brain, kind of similar to how I do, but she talks a little bit about how she gets and works with kiddos in the classroom. And they do a lot of work around sensory words, and like there's a big list of sensory words, and they'll even give the example, can you draw the sensory? So they gave this example of this kiddo who had big behaviors, was fighting daily, and she asked him to draw out how he was feeling. And he drew out ice cubes on his hand and like red fiery hot in his head. And he was able to really ground himself by describing what he was feeling in his body. So often when I have kiddo clients in my office, I'll ask them, you know, like they'll say, oh, I felt really angry. I'm like, where did that feel in your body? Right. So helping them get to that, like even just naming it actually helps deactivate our stress response system so we can go back to this learning, wise brain mode. So now that I've talked about the brain, the nervous system, and how we can connect with our kiddos, I'm going to hand it off to Will Jar, and who's going to talk about the educator. And that's my information with you, and I will reach out to Emma if you want to ask any more questions.
Thank you, Megan. Just as an FYI, these slides will be shared. And Megan also shared a resource that we're going to come back to this reflection piece later, okay? But we did want, there's like a 30-page document of